I'll tell you, it's amazing how people can heal from these serious issues that can't necessarily be healed by medicine right now, just by food. It makes sense to me because it's something we're exposed to every single day. We're putting it into our bodies, so that's what our body's using to remake our cells. But it does still surprise me.
Welcome to the Wise Traditions Podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We're your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
Hey everybody, I'm Hilda Labrada Gore and this is episode 159. My guest today is Monica Ford. Monica is an ancestral cuisine educator and a chef for very busy families, celebrities, and athletes. Her business is Real Food Devotee, the first traditional foods delivery service in Southern California. I met her this summer and I was blown away by how delicious her food was and how beautifully sourced. I get why people love it. And I get why people love Monica. She is so knowledgeable, and one of her specialties is food fermentation. Today, Monica takes us on a fantastic journey through time as she explains how food fermentation started, what it means for our health, and why we got away from it. She shares how we benefit when we add more live fermented foods to our diet, and she really gets down to the nitty-gritty about what wild fermentation really is and how it has the power to heal us. Our conversation was recorded as a part of a podcast festival in Baltimore, Maryland this past fall. Before we get into the conversation, we want to give a quick thanks to our sponsors who keep the show on the air. The Wise Traditions podcast is sponsored in part by Vintage Tradition Tallow Balm, the original whole food of skincare. Check out their new products, including a non-toxic paperboard tube for lips and on the go. Get yours now at vintagetradition.com. And ancestral supplements, putting back in what the modern world has left out. New Zealand-sourced liver, organ meats, and bone marrow in convenient gelatin capsules. Order yours today at ancestralsupplements.com. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Monica. We're so glad you're here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we are part of a live Baltimore Podcasting Festival, and we're so thrilled to be here at the Crown in downtown Baltimore. And it's kind of prescient, is that the right word? Because this Wise Traditions group is going to have a conference here in November. So it's kind of cool that we're here, don't you think so, Monica?
Yeah, that's awesome. Mm-hmm.
So she's much more enthusiastic than she seems at this moment in time. But she's had a long day because she's been at that Natural Product Expo in Baltimore also. Anyway, but what I wanted to talk about with you today, Monica, is wild fermentation. And I think we've titled this talk, Walking on the Wild Side.
Mm-hmm. We're ready to get into it? I am.
Yes, I know you are. So, okay, what I want you to do is kind of paint the big picture for us. Tell us about ferments around the world.
Yeah, so there are lots of items that are fermented, and you guys have probably eaten them, maybe even without knowing. You probably all know about pickles, but I don't know if you know coffee is fermented, or chocolate is fermented, cheese, of course, all these different things from different cultures. And so many cultures around the world had their own fermented items, and it kind of imbued them with this very robust health that we're sort of rediscovering now with all of this study into probiotics. But really, the original place we got this was fermentation. And originally, we did this just to preserve food because we didn't have refrigerators. But once we began to have refrigerators and came around to convenience, we kind of lost this art. But it's this really amazing art that really imbues people with greater health, a more diverse microbiome. We've all heard this word floating around now, right? So the microbiome is your balance of bacteria in your gut. And what scientists are finding, that the more diversity you have, the more healthy you are, the fewer allergies you have. So it's this really amazing way of preserving food, way of making food that's layered and delicious, but also imbues you with this amazing health as well.
So raise your hand if you've ever had sauerkraut. Raise your hand if you've ever had kimchi.
Oh, it's aromatic.
Okay, amazing. Raise your hand if you've ever had fermented pickles. It's a little bit different than the regular pickles, and my friend will explain why in a minute. So raise your hand if you've ever had kombucha. What
Yeah,
about
Baltimore gets some ferments. Not
Yeah.
everybody raises their hands as many times.
But coffee and chocolate? I seriously didn't know there's fermented cheese. Can you
Yeah.
explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so cheese is fermented in many different ways. Lots of times it's mold fermentation, so when you get the cheese that's covered in kind of a white crust, that's a mold fermentation. And coffee, when the beans are picked, they're put in a warm environment and allowed to ferment in order to get kind of this breakdown of the outer shell of the coffee cherry, and then it's roasted. So there are a lot of, as well as a cocoa bean for chocolate. So there are a lot of ways that fermentation or the bacteria in fermentation actually pre-digest parts of the food to give it that fermented taste and also to imbue it with bacteria. It's this really weird idea of having our food pre-digested for us.
Right. I've heard this before.
Yeah.
It's amazing because, in other words, we only have one stomach. So we're not ruminants. Tell me if I'm getting this right.
You're right.
So that means what ruminants can do, like a cow, will eat grass, and then in one of its stomachs, it'll like process it and ferment it, make it easier to digest. But we only have one stomach, so things need to be prepared for us to digest before we get them in our bodies. Is that right?
Yeah, it makes a big difference. So, like for instance, for sauerkraut, if you eat raw cabbage and then you ferment the cabbage, it'll actually have 20 times more vitamin C bioavailable to us. So in other words, we won't excrete it like we would with raw cabbage or even cooked cabbage. If you ferment it, it'll have much more vitamins available to you, which is kind of amazing.
So this is the wise traditions thing, you guys, is that people have been doing this for millennia, right, to preserve their food, as she said. But at the same time, they're getting more out of it. And it's just kind of like this cool thing that maybe the science, they didn't know all the stuff about.
Yeah, so when we
benefit.
were making long ship voyages, sauerkraut was actually the thing that cured scurvy on these long ship voyages. It wasn't just raw cabbage, right? It was sauerkraut because scurvy is a deficiency of vitamin C, and so this is the only way that they could stay healthy on long ship voyages. They finally figured out that the guys who had a big barrel of sauerkraut were the only ones not getting scurvy.
Well, and so isn't it wild now, like you just go into a regular store like a Safeway or a Giant, you don't have to go to a natural food health store to find kombucha or kraut or yogurt with live probiotics, right? But why is it like trending now, and why did we get away from it?
I think we got away from it because of convenience. Refrigerators came about. We could get the same taste in pickles if we just poured a little vinegar on them and canned them. So it's sort of that same taste we always crave, which is the fermentation taste, but it doesn't have that health value either. So, and it's also, we're kind of like really scared now to leave things out on the counter, They call it like the temperature danger zone in the health department, right? So you're fermenting things on your counter, which you have to do at like somewhere around 75 degrees, give or take a little, and that is actually defined as the danger zone, So when I first started doing this, I remember it would be this whole weird sort of awkward learning process with the health department. Now they get it. Now there's so much more education about it and so many more people are doing it. But at the time it was like, oh, you're leaving this out on your counter. It's going to rot. Meanwhile, we've been doing it for hundreds of years in every culture around the world. So it's this really interesting paradox in our minds. But we're all, putting on hand sanitizer, lowering our bacterial count, and not making fermented foods. So we're kind of conditioned to be scared about it. And when I first started making fermented foods, I was freaked out too. I was afraid there was going to be mold. I was afraid it was going to go bad or be mushy or be disgusting, especially when I fermented things like milk. I mean, right? We're not supposed to leave that out on the counter. But it actually turns into something totally delicious and layered, and I would even say gourmet, and really beneficial for your health.
And I think it scares us in a way because we've also been raised in a society where everything's supposed to be kind of sterile, right?
Yeah.
And suddenly it's alive. Like if you guys, how many of you have ever like seen like the SCOBY of kombucha, like the mother that makes it grow? Raise your hand.
Looks like an alien, no?
Right? Yeah, there's applause in the back. Good, good. But it's scary. Yeah, it looks like it's from another world. It really does. And it's alive. And so there's something about that that's threatening but also beautiful. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so kombucha is really interesting because it's this marriage of bacteria and yeast, and they come together and make the mushroom that people talk about. It's called a zygomatic mat. And it actually consumes, if you've ever made kombucha and you've tasted the tea before it's fermented, it is sickeningly sweet. And I am from Texas, so I've had all the sweet tea, but it is like disgustingly sweet. You cannot drink it. But after the fermentation process, if you've tasted kombucha, those of you out there, it has a certain vinegary taste. You know, that sugar is consumed. And there are so many more B vitamins available, C vitamins, and lots of beneficial bacteria and yeast. So it's crazy.
It's crazy and kind of wild, which is why we call this talk Walking on the Wild Side, because you taught me something when I was in California that I'd never heard before.
What's that?
Coming up, Monica explains to you what she explained to me in California, and how wild it was, actually, when she got started fermenting in the first place. Plus, she explains how the diverse bacteria found in these fermented foods has the power to heal the sickest among us.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions Podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Ancestral Supplements. Ancestral Supplements offer New Zealand-sourced bone marrow and nose-to-tail organ meats like liver, heart, kidney, pancreas, spleen, and more in simple, convenient gelatin capsules. Traditional peoples and early ancestral healers believed that eating the organs from a healthy animal would strengthen and support the health of the corresponding organ of the individual. In other words, a person with a weak heart was fed the heart of a healthy animal, and so on. I know I don't get enough organ meats in my own diet, so I went ahead and got some supplements of my own. Visit ancestralsupplements.com today to see what it can do for you. Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world has left out. And we want to connect with you face to face. Virtual connections are awesome, but there's nothing like seeing people in person. People, it is not too late to sign up for the Wise Traditions Conference in Baltimore, November 16th to the 19th. We'll all be there. Sally Fallon Morell, Chris Masterjohn, Dr. Tom Cowan, Natasha Campbell-McBride, and many other powerful, insightful speakers. I will be there too, of course. So go to wisetraditions.org to sign up today. And if you can't come for the whole thing, just try to come for a piece of it. We would love to see you there. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. There's a difference between wild fermentation and the kind that starts with a starter. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so wild fermentation is the kind of fermentation that everyone can do. And when I first started doing this, I didn't have a lot of money to work with. And, you know, I saw people doing it in like these fancy jars, and it was all Instagrammable and beautiful. And I could not find a mason jar to save my life. And I couldn't afford to buy these starter cultures that you can buy online, you know, these little freeze-dried packets. And so I started reading about traditional cultures, and like in Korea, they make kimchi and they pack it in a clay pot and bury it in the ground. And I thought, well, maybe I can just go to the grocery store and get a freaking gallon of pickles, pour them out, and use that jar. So I did that, and I just used salt and water and cabbage. So sauerkraut, just a plain sauerkraut, was my first fermentation. And it worked perfectly. And so all you're doing in wild fermentation is you're not adding specific strains of starter. You're just creating this beneficial environment for the bacteria to multiply and grow. And so bacteria are different on every piece of produce, depending on where it's grown, what season it's grown in, what variety, where did you buy it? Did you buy it from Whole Foods and it sat in a distributor warehouse for a while, or did you buy it from the farmer at the farmer's market? It's different all the time, and that creates that diversity. You know, it's kind of like, why would I go stand out on the grass and get whatever bacteria is out there, you know? And put a starter out first. It's kind of the same thing, you know, like, I only want these bacteria. I know so much more than nature, right? It's better to just go with that because it creates that diversity and that robust health, that bulletproof feeling, I think.
Well, I'm thinking about how we embrace diversity on so many levels, like in representation in Congress, we want diversity more and more. There's a cry for that in 2018, and I'm so thankful. I'm Latina, and she's Egyptian. So we're all about that, right? But for some reason, it's like if you go to a fast food restaurant or you go to buy certain food in one part of the world and then you go to another part of the world and it's there, it's the same food. Like, it shouldn't be like that. Do you know what I'm saying? All right, I have an embarrassing story to tell on myself. So when I went to
good.
Paris, when I went to Paris with my sister when I was in college, the first place we ate was McDonald's. Oh my gosh.
Gross.
I don't know what we were
Why?
thinking. I don't know. I guess we thought, oh, here's a piece of home, but that makes no sense, right? Oh, and there are so many reasons it's so wrong to me today. I can't believe I just confessed that. But so I think what we're looking for, I guess is what I'm saying, is we like the standardization that a burger here is the same as a burger there. But the thing about wild fermentation is it's kind of the unexpected. You're getting cultures from the air. Have you heard of San Francisco sourdough, for example? There's a reason people like it is because they make it there with who knows what's in the air there. And if you make it there, it's different than what's in the air here.
Yeah, and that's a really cool point about making your own any kind of fermentation. And some of them can be even easier than sauerkraut. Like I make a fermented raspberry sauce that's delicious. It's kind of like a gateway fermented food. You know, you can give that to your kids. They don't know it's fermented or good for them. It's delicious on ice cream. But whenever you make something in your own home, it's so much different than every other small little microenvironment around you. So it's going to be kind of tailored to your own health. Or this is what a lot of scientists believe now who are studying the microbiome. It's really interesting.
It's so interesting. And didn't Michael Pollan write a book called Cooked? Mm-hmm. And I've interviewed other health professionals like Joel Salatin, who's a farmer actually, and Sally Fallon-Morell, the head of the foundation. And they all say one of the first steps to improve your health is just to get cooking. And maybe this is a part of it.
Yeah, this is a part of it. Except the coolest part about fermentation is it's not like following a recipe. You know, it requires you get in touch with food and also these symbionts, this bacteria. You know, we're genetically more bacterial cells than we are human cells. So this looks like Hilda here, but it's actually just mostly a big pile of bacteria.
Oh my gosh, that's so weird.
Squirming around and yeasts and things. But I think that's just utterly amazing that you know that we've kind of disregarded that part of ourselves, and without those things, people become actually quite sick.
Can you speak to that a little bit? What do you mean? Like if I don't have fermented foods in my diet, I'm going to get sick? Is that what you mean? And why?
Yeah. So, you know, there are extreme measures being taken now to help people who have bacterial infections. You know, we've all heard of like SIBO, MRSA, things you can contract from too much antibiotic use, and maybe you're in the hospital and you contract something there. So, like in Australia, this technique came about. Have you guys ever heard of fecal transplants? Yes. Oh my gosh, there are people who've heard of that. That's amazing. That's amazing. I have something for you. I'm going to throw this.
Wait. I was like, please tell me you're not going to demonstrate what this is.
Yeah. Can you come up here? Do you mind volunteering?
I knew the show was going to be crap.
It'll make
no,
you really healthy. But, you know, so fecal transplants, I mean, that's how far gone we are from fermented foods, which used to imbue us with this bacteria that we've evolved with, right? We've come to the point where we will do fecal transplants on people who will die otherwise from a healthy person, you know, so...
What they're trying to do is get that healthy bacteria that's being almost excreted with the waste of this one healthy person and giving it to a sick person.
Yeah,
I don't
and the interesting thing is it's actually dead bacteria at that point, but the body can still take the DNA from that bacteria and re-imbue the gut with that bacterial DNA and makeup.
Okay, so we don't want to get to that point, right? So will including fermented foods help diversify our microbiome and keep us healthier?
Absolutely. Even science is bearing that out now, so it's not just us crunchy hippies.
But I did want to ask you, as a crunchy hippie, because you're not a doctor or a scientist.
No, I'm not. Should we have said that at the beginning?
She plays one on TV.
I have made hundreds of gallons of fermented foods.
But so how do you know this helps heal people?
I know because I've been doing this for about 10 years, and most of my business is based on healthcare practitioners all over the Southern California area who send people to me for gut healing. And, you know, this is in conjunction with other medical procedures and modalities. but they're varied, and they're varied diseases, everything from, just bloating to things like Crohn's or autoimmune disorders. And I'll tell you, it's amazing how people can heal from these serious issues that can't necessarily be healed by medicine right now, just by food. It makes sense to me because it's something we're exposed to every single day. We're putting it into our bodies, so that's what our body's using to remake our cells. But it does still surprise me. It is still amazing, It's amazing to see a baby. We had a 3-month-old baby 2 months ago who the parents came to us, and his arms were covered in eczema. They were just like oozing, scratchy, itchy. He was crying all the time, and the parents were harried from staying up with him, and it was very hard to see that. But, after a month, he was okay. His skin was beautiful. He's a gorgeous little boy, and he wasn't crying all the time either. He wasn't in pain and itching. And it was just from the food. It really didn't have anything to do with me. It just has to do with that bacteria.
What were some of the foods his parents were feeding him?
So we just, they were still breastfeeding, so he was only 3 months old. So they also added some fermented tonic that we make, which is essentially sauerkraut juice, just the brine and sauerkraut. It's a long ferment, but it's a wild ferment too, not starter-derived. I know, I'm a bit of a snob for that. And that and some broth. And so those two things together healed him in a month, It's amazing.
That is amazing. And didn't the father of modern medicine, Hippocrates, say, let food be your medicine and medicine be your food?
I know. They knew it all the way back then. And now we're like, no, give me this pill. Not that modern medicine is bad. I definitely don't want to poo-poo that. There's amazing breakthroughs happening, and I think the acute care in modern medicine is great. But I think it's also important for us to take care of ourselves every day through food.
Notice she said poo-poo, fecal transplants. You got something on your mind.
I'm obsessed. Scatological mind.
Exactly. Well, actually, I did want to ask you, what would be a good first step for someone who wants to try ferments maybe for the first time or include more of them in their diet?
I think an easy first step, well, you can just try all the things we have back there.
Yes.
But also is to try making it at home. You can start with something really, really simple. You can go online and search what you want to do. If you want to go onto my website, I have recipes there. It's realfooddevotee.com, and there are cards back there. But there's a lot of information now. I remember when I first started, it was like just something weird that people weren't really doing yet, and now it's hip and cool. You can find cookbooks and just so many organizations like the Weston Price Organization and your podcast. I know that you've had a lot of people on who are foodies, who do fermentation as well. So there's a lot of information out there, and I would just find something that you like if you like pickles, if you like raspberry sauce, if you like sriracha, if there's something you like eating anyway, I would try fermenting it because you're getting a major health benefit too, and it's still delicious. So there's no reason it should be yucky. If you don't like sauerkraut, then don't make sauerkraut. Ferment something else.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
And so I want to ask you in closing, if the listener or the audience here could do one thing to improve their health and maybe related to what we've been talking about today, what would you recommend that they do, Monica?
Well, I think I would just get more in touch with your food, so don't be disconnected from it. I think that a great way to do that is through fermentation, because fermentation is part science, but it's also part art. So even though you might follow a recipe to make that raspberry sauce, you're going to have to look at it to know when it's ready. And during the summer, it's going to ferment faster, and during the cold, it's going to ferment slower. So it requires you to be mindful and be in touch with your food instead of just buying something from the store. And I think that gives you greater appreciation and greater health overall. I really think it does. And it's also fun. It's very magical and fun to put something on your counter, and it turns into something else completely.
It sounds amazing, and I have an idea. I think we'll put a link in the show notes with the recipes of the three things you have in the back of the room right now. So can you remind us again what you have on that back table?
Yeah, so we have fermented sriracha sauce, which is really delicious. And then we have a wild fermented garlic and purple cabbage sauerkraut. And then we also have a golden milk kefir, and this is a non-dairy kefir. So the people at Zuma Valley Coconut donated this beautiful cold-pressed coconut cream, and I kefired that. While I was here, they didn't take my kefir grains away at TSA, thank God. So I've been fermenting this in my B&B, and that's out on the table too. So kefir, sriracha, and sauerkraut out on the table. Please take one of each and enjoy them, and please feel free to ask questions. Yeah.
That's awesome. We will be hanging around, and check out the Wise Traditions podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you.
My guest today was Monica Ford. For more on Monica, visit her website, realfooddevotee.com. That's Real Food Devotee, DEVOTEE. And for show notes from today's episode, just go to the westonaprice.org website and go to the podcast page. There you'll also see our listener survey. Take just a moment and fill it out for us. It would be a big favor to us, and it would mean a lot. Thanks in advance. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss a thing. You can also rate and review the show on iTunes. We read each and every review. It's a big encouragement and lets us know that our work is not in vain, so thank you. Next week, my guest is Gina Baker. Gina is a writer, farmer, and researcher who has a particular interest in the centenarians of the peninsula, the Nicoya, on the western coast of Costa Rica. In our conversation, Gina does some myth-busting on the so-called blue zones, areas of longevity around the planet. In the book by that title, they incorrectly describe the inhabitants of this region of Costa Rica as mostly vegetarians, when in fact their diet contains a wide variety of animal products, including fried pork, pork brains, and lots of lard. Gina interviewed numerous centenarians to get to the bottom of this myth and to bust it. So check in next week for the information that she's going to bring. It's powerful. Finally, a quick thank you to our podcast production team. Assistants include Cassie Reef, Diva Rizvi, Melanie Ahern, and Ari O'Hara. Cheryl Huftelin helps with social media. Mary Hine, Olga de Villiers, and Joy de los Santos boost sponsorship and help with special projects. Our listening team includes Heather Carpentier and Victor Cosetto, and Amy Matias helps with transcriptions. And the music is from Michelle Bloom's CD Big Backyard, specifically the track called Sunny Side Up. It is so charming. Find her music at allthingsbloom.com. Well, that's it. Keep in touch, everybody. I'm on Instagram at Holistic Hilda. Follow me for health tips, podcast stuff, and behind the scenes on the show, and me. Thanks, and see you soon. Oh, and if you ever want to launch a podcast, hit me up. I'm a podcast consultant with a specialty on shows having to do with health. Get my book, Podcasting Made Simple, on Amazon, or reach out to me through my website, holistichilda.com. I offer free 15-minute consults. I'd love to brainstorm ideas for helping you get your show out to the world. Thanks, everybody, and see you soon.
Thanks for listening today. We have all kinds of resources to support you on your health journey. On the Weston A. Price Foundation website, you'll find podcasts, blogs, articles, and brochures related to just about any health topic you can imagine. You can also find a local chapter to help you discover sources of real, organic food in your area. And you can become a member to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism. Visit westonaprice.org for all this and more. And remember that the Wise Traditions podcast is available on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.